I've been told by many people that I need to interview people who are directly involved with the protest movement. Elektra and Dave, you are the two people who were kind enough to give me your time to discuss what's going on.
Hi, I'm Elektra Kostopoulo. I specialize in Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean history. I am myself a migrant from Europe. I came to the US about 11 years ago now. I'm originally from Greece. And I have been teaching at Rutgers NGIT, the Federated Department of History, here at New York, New Jersey. And as of recently, I'm one of the organizers with Uncommitted New Jersey for reasons that we will try to explain and engage with shortly.
Okay. And Dave Fox?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a Teamster and a member of Philly DSA. And through the DSA, I've engaged with protests for Palestine for the past several years. And was, despite being a member of Philly DSA, I live in South Jersey and commute into the city for work. So I was happily surprised to find protests popping up in the suburbs near where I actually live, and engaging with a group there called South Jersey for Gaza. Was connected with the Uncommitted Movement and got into the organizing, trying to get that on the ballot and whatnot. So my wife is a delegate for Uncommitted here in our district. And yeah, we're just really excited to do whatever we can for Palestine.
So tell me, what is the Uncommitted Movement that you're both a part of? What are you not committed to?
We are very clearly not committed to genocide as of recently. And if I am to explain our presence here, as you said, you wanted to contact people who are directly involved in this whole movement. And that expands to the student protests and all that. And we have been looking into your work. And I personally find what you're doing very exciting, trying to cover different angles of, relatively controversial issues and to have a nuanced discussion. So our presence here, and the reason why I personally invited Dave as well, is in and of itself a statement and a manifestation as to what the Uncommitted is supposed to be. We do not want to have an academic discussion that is disconnected from society. I would love to do that by myself, given that, fortunately or not, this is what I do for a living. At the same time, this is not what the Uncommitted is. We are not committing to American foreign policy. We're not committing to the Democratic Party as it stands right now. And in a very tangible way, we are trying to do something, anything, really, that could translate into some actual political outcomes sooner rather than later. So it's a dynamic initiative. It started spontaneously as we have seen American foreign policy over the issue of Gaza deteriorating, and as what started as it was already bad at the beginning, but it would escalate despite the protests, despite the discussion that it triggered within the US. So about a month ago, we decided that we need to do something more tangible about it, politically speaking. And it was a movement that was inspired by Michigan, clearly. We came together, we decided to form a group, put the uncommitted option on the ballot for New Jersey because it wasn't there before. And for starters, to give the administration, the Biden administration, a very, very clear, very loud message that we are registered Democrats. Not only we vote, we campaign. We are people who, by and large, are very active about reproductive rights, human rights, migrant rights in general. And we won't vote for you because you don't represent us. So if you do not want to lose this election to Donald Trump again, which is going to be a disaster, clearly, but this is not an option either. So if you do not want to lose the election to Donald Trump, and if you represent even superficially a shred of what the Democratic Party is supposed to be, and if you don't want to completely disregard your voters, betraying even the most basic ideals of what a procedural democracy looks like, forget about the essence of the whole thing. Let's talk about your mandate, the procedure of it all. This unapologetic involvement of our country in what's happening in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, and I can explain why I use the term without trying to make it sound like anything else but that. I can explain where I'm coming from and how I see the whole thing. So regardless, if the genocide in Gaza and the American involvement, complicity, enablement of this whole disaster that could escalate, and it's self-destructive for the US as well, doesn't stop, we won't vote for the Dems in large numbers. Not only we won't vote for them, we will campaign against them. As far as I am concerned, this is the message I am delivering to Joe Biden personally. It's a dynamic movement. People approach it from a different perspective, but many of us feel that this administration has crossed every line. And if we fail to renegotiate what this agreement between the alleged government and the people is supposed to be, then the battle is already over. It can be Donald Trump or anybody else. The American democracy doesn't seem to work even superficially anymore. So to me, it doesn't make a difference, quite frankly. And that's my personal message that agrees with how some, although not necessarily all, right, in the campaign see it. Dave?
Yeah, so specifically Uncommitted has said that we're not committed to any particular political party or candidate. So a lot of us, I guess, have watched this process evolve over the past eternal election season, seeing as different people offer different options, whether that's Marianne Williamson or Dean Phillips or whoever wants to run in the primary, both of whom ended up eventually somewhat tepidly calling for a ceasefire, probably trying to get some votes from people who are active in the streets with the protest movement and whatnot, or third-party candidates, whether that's Cornel West or Claudia De La Cruz or Jill Stein. But it's like there hasn't been a coalescing of support behind any of these candidates in a way that would make material change for folks on the ground. And that really needs to be the center of what we're doing. So if we need to stop a genocide from happening right now, we need to do what we can do right now. So for example, it's since this initial aggression began in October, it seems like we're averaging about 5,000 people being killed per month. And so each month, as primaries come and go in different states, whether they're foregone conclusions or not, those states have, since Michigan at least, taken the opportunity to express themselves at the ballot box to say to Joe Biden, we need you to stop this right now. Because whether or not we can get a third-party candidate or something in November is not really the issue right now, because between now and November, however many people may die, 5,000 per month on average so far, if we aren't able to stop this now. And so what happened in Michigan was very exciting. We got this together in short order. New Jersey, as Elektra alluded to, put a lot of procedural hurdles there. Like we had to get a certain number of signatures in each delegate district, which the delegate districts are actually different from our legislative districts. So even figuring out who's in what district was a whole mess. Like I live in Oakland, New Jersey. My child will attend Collingswood High School, which is in the adjacent town. that adjacent town is not in our same district, and so on down the line. So when we're trying to get this, and then New Jersey, this is a bit of a local inside baseball thing, but New Jersey's been dealing with a somewhat undemocratic process of the county line from the party for years, and that was just abolished. So we were navigating what the old ballots were, what the new ballots are, how that's going to look this whole time. But we were able to get a slogan on the ballot here in New Jersey, which is a bit distinct from some of the other states with Uncommitted, that specifically says justice for Palestine, permanent ceasefire now. So the Democratic Party is not going to be able to pretend that this is about another issue. They're not going to be able to pretend that this is just some disengagement or something like that. Like in different states, I know Pennsylvania just had their primary. They had to run a write-in campaign because it wasn't on their ballot either. And so people writing uncommitted on their ballot, it's like, all right, well, they're saying uncommitted. And like your opening question, what is it? What is uncommitted? And in New Jersey, we've made that less ambiguous than it can possibly be anywhere else. Like we've been able to get the actual word Palestine, the actual word ceasefire, even the word permanent on the ballot, so that we can really directly address this issue. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity because New Jersey is typically sort of deprived a voice in this electoral process. Like we're very late in the day. I was a Bernie supporter. By the time it got here, the campaign was essentially over. But what that means now is we have an opportunity to have a long on-ramp to organize to get as many votes as possible, to put numbers on the board, to say, Joe Biden, if you want these votes, you're going to have to change your policy. And I think that the opportunity that's been provided by the previous states building up to this, and the opportunity of us having this really concrete example of there are 300,000 Muslims here in New Jersey. It's one of the largest communities in the country. And that's leaving aside DSA members like myself, and other allies that have come alongside of us, whether that's Jewish Voice for Peace Action, or any of the other endorsees that you can find on our website, uncommittednewjersey.com. We've been very active on social media trying to push this, Uncommitted New Jersey, on all platforms. But the main thing is that we need to make material change as soon as possible for the people of Palestine. They're dying by the thousands, and that's going to continue unless Joe Biden changes the policy, which he has the power to do. I don't know if folks have seen, there's an Israeli general that went on record that said if the U.S. stopped providing the weapons, we wouldn't be able to continue doing this. And like, that's their command and control structure. So if they're acknowledging that material reality, it's about time that the Democratic Party did as well.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. So the first question, I guess, I want to ask is, to what extent is the Uncommitted organization, whether it's in New Jersey or anywhere else, involved with the protests on college campuses today? That's my first question.
I would be very glad to answer that. And Dave, maybe you can take it from.
Yeah.
So we have been very involved on a personal level. And again, I would like to highlight how spontaneous, right, this movement and the organizing of it all has been, and that resonates fully with our students' efforts to also give a voice to the voiceless. I mean, it's a cliche, but I guess what links us all, essentially, is that we felt that urgency to do something. So this is not a campaign that has been decided or organized top down. It's quite the opposite. And quite frankly, I feel I am one of the oldest, if not the oldest, people on the Uncommitted campaign, which speaks to how central the youth has been in all of it, right? We're also, those of us who are academics, graduate students, or currently teaching in any capacity, are very involved with the students' movement. As of today, we have 2 encampments here at Rutgers, New Brunswick and Newark, tents are going up to join the other 120 universities across the country. And many of us faculty members support fully our students. So in their spontaneity, these two movements are truly connected. On a personal level, you'll find the exact same people, such as myself, trying to participate in the Uncommitted campaign, support our students, have conversations about what's happening. It's part of what I teach. It's part of what I am trying to connect to my own research and work. So on a personal level, you'll find some of the usual suspects clearly participating in some capacity in all of these mobilizations. And from a theoretical perspective, if we are to find a common thread between the two, I would say that this is clearly a generational issue. Younger people are not represented in American politics, and I will put that in as simple a way as possible. Younger people are not represented in American politics. Some of them have decided to check out, right, to withdraw, to not participate, to not vote anymore, because there are no good options. And that's something many of us can agree on. But the gravity of what's happening in Palestine, and we can talk about the symbolism of it all and why it hit such a nerve with so many different groups of people, just became a trigger that somehow mobilized so many people, with the youth being very central in all of these mobilizations. And those of us who think that it is a generational issue, that at the end of the day, this Cold War mentality that is parochial, self-destructive, and truly a manifestation of profound incompetence on the end of our political representatives, needs to end. So there are a number of connections there as to how the two movements are very closely intertwined on the personal level, but also, and perhaps more essentially, as to what they mean to us as participants. Potentially, what do they reveal about the country as a whole, and this constant negotiation of power that we need to establish as our right, our representation, which is missing from politics, and how are we going to reclaim it? I guess this is first and foremost about Palestine, clearly, to stop the atrocities, to stop the genocide, but it became a trigger for so many of us precisely because of the historical moment, right? The fact that it happens now, where the US is in general, in terms of political establishments and how they fail to represent all of us, and mainly the youth, have everything to do with the significance and the symbolism of Gaza, in my view.
Dave, did you want to say something about how the Uncommitted Movement is connected to the protests on college campuses today?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were doing some of that heavy lifting to get the signatures to get on the ballot and whatnot, one of the main sources we were able to call upon were local mosques, but then also local college campuses. So we were out tabling, talking to folks on campus at all three Rutgers campuses. We were at Princeton. We were at several other universities around the state, and we were able to get just about instant support. If you have a Palestinian flag, you have a keffiyeh, you have literally any signifier that you're in support of this movement, and you go onto a college campus, people are going to want to talk to you. People are going to want to see what you're about and what you're getting involved with. And so we were able to form a lot of really interesting organizing connections in that way. And so as soon as the encampments began to pick up around the country, we were already connected to these folks. So our campaign has been endorsed by basically every Students for Justice Palestine chapter in the state. And so whenever they're setting up these encampments, which they tend to be some of the lead organizers, and like I said, we're endorsed by Jewish Voice for Peace Action as well, and their chapters on different campuses have been heavily involved with setting these up. And so we're like, all right, these are the organizers. We are already in contact with them. And then it's become another central place where we can go to talk to folks about the issue. So as we've seen in a lot of instances, people are having educational talks, doing different types of organizing, religious services, what have you, at these encampments. And one of the things that we've been able to do is to go there and get folks to take the pledge to vote uncommitted in the Democratic primary on June 4th, to send an electoral message to Joe Biden as well. And in DSA circles, it's pretty common to say that your vote might be the least part of your political organizing. So obviously, folks need to do whatever they have capacity to do beyond voting, which that can be going down and supporting folks at these protests. So like one of our steering committee members has been a marshal at Rutgers for the encampment. We've had folks every night. Our WhatsApp chats are constantly blowing up, telling people who needs what supplies, who's going where, who can we talk to. Elektra and I were actually just joking before this call that like we need some kind of non-proliferation treaty on group chats and organizing spaces, because it's like, all right, well, I'm in the chat for this camp. I'm in the chat for this statewide effort. I'm in the chat for this nationwide effort. Which chat is which link in or whatever. And everybody's talking to everybody about everything all the time. And it's just a constant flow of like, how can we support these students, even if we aren't students? And then how can we support faculty? How can we support whoever's doing whatever they can? Because as we said earlier, the main thing is material change for folks on the ground in Gaza. So if these college students are able to get their universities to divest, which that's their main demand at most of these encampments, is divest the hedge fund that basically universities in the neoliberal era have been turned into, from arms companies, from the Israeli state, from Israeli companies, so that we can put economic pressure, just as they did for apartheid South Africa, to stop genocide actively right now, and in the long term for a free Palestine, to remove the apartheid state power structure that is oppressing these people. Like, the only thing that we can do here in this country is to get our imperial boot up off of their necks. And whether that means voting against Joe Biden in the primary in order to send him a message, or whether that means getting our various institutions to divest. Like, I would love to try to get, my union hasn't even called for a ceasefire yet. I would love to get my union to call for a ceasefire. I would love to get my union to divest our pension fund from any and all Israeli connected or weapons manufacturing connected investments that they may have. Because what's happened over the past several decades is that working people, whether they're students or whether they're already in the broader workforce, have had our tax dollars redistributed into these organizations. And not only our tax dollars, but then the product of our labor redistributed into these organizations. And we don't even have control over the investments that they're making. So I think the college students are really drawing attention to something important, in that they are going to school ostensibly to get an education, but they're paying fees to these organizations that are then taking that money, turning around and investing it in Lockheed Martin, investing it in Raytheon, investing it in Elbit Systems. And these weapons companies are using that money actively to murder Palestinian children right now. And that's true of these college students with their tuition. That's true of my retirement funds for many workers. And we don't have direct control of these things. And we've been convinced that we should just entrust it to these nameless, faceless bureaucrats. But if nameless, faceless bureaucrats are going to invest my pension or a college student's tuition into murder in foreign countries or in this country, I'm not particularly interested in that. I don't want the police in my community to be used to repress these college students. And so even as I've not been in college for years now, it's my direct interests are at stake here. Like, I don't want my tax dollars going to this. I would rather my tax dollars go so that college students can have that education for free, which used to be a thing in this country prior to neoliberalism. Which I know I've heard some of your before, and you've talked about that extensively. The education system in this country has been hollowed out, and I want my children to have better opportunities as they're going forward so that they don't have to be implicated in genocide or implicated in any other form of action that they don't want to be implicated in just in order to get an education. People should not have to sign up for the military to get an education. People should not have to fund weapons companies or Israeli apartheid in order to get educated in this country. And that's true. What I'm especially proud of here in New Jersey is that from the state schools all the way up to the Ivies, like we have Rutgers has encampment, Princeton has encampment. We've gotten extensive support for Uncommitted at both of those encampments. And hopefully this movement will continue to grow and the pressure will build and we can actually get things to stop, because there are no universities left in Gaza. They've been leveled, and they've been leveled with our tax dollars. And I would rather build universities than level universities if I have any say in how my tax dollars are spent. But like one of the things today in the WhatsApp chats I was talking about earlier, sorry, this is a bit rambling, but Donald Norcross is my representative, and he's a co-sponsor of a bill right now that's going to introduce the, I believe it's the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which defines criticism of the Israeli state as a form of anti-Semitism. And that's like, there was no opportunity to primary this man. You know what I mean? Like my voice is not being heard. The New Jersey, for all intents and purposes, is a one-party state. One of the things I'm fond of pointing out to my comrades in Philly DSA is they get a lot of crap about being a swing state with running an uncommitted campaign. And people are, oh, aren't you going to give this to Trump or whatever? New Jersey is not a swing state. New Jersey is a deep, deep blue state. Joe Biden won this state by something like 800,000 votes. If we can get 1 million votes for Uncommitted, that would be fantastic. But that's probably a bit beyond our capacity. As Elektra said, this is a bottom-up effort. And so what's really cool about this opportunity is that we can actually try to get our voices heard by these people that have not been accountable to their constituents, because it's ridiculous. I went to one of the places I collected signatures when we were organizing was at a protest at the New Jersey State House. We were there with CARE New Jersey and several other organizations trying to avoid that being codified at the state level. And now my representative wants to codify it at the federal level. And like, my wife and children are Jewish. I am very concerned about this issue. I'm concerned about anti-Semitism, but the anti-Semitism I see in this country that's a physical danger to me and my family has been from the right. Like, people want to talk about the anti-Semitism is from the river to the sea or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, the owner of Twitter engages in great replacement theory every day. And people, Congress people who engage in great replacement theory every day, that doesn't get counted as an instance of anti-Semitism, but pro-Palestinian activism does. And it's like, I know who was chanting Jews will not replace us. And it wasn't the people that are part of this movement. It was not college students on campuses. It was not any of the people that have been involved with this. We've had, like, whenever there's anybody saying anything that could even be vaguely construed as anti-Semitic in protest spaces, they are called in or called out immediately. It's addressed, it's taken care of. We have folks in leadership that are able to take care of that. And for the state to codify how our speech rights can be used to criticize a client state is absurd, because that's what Israel is, if we're being serious. Like, it's the client state of the United States government. One of the things that's clarifying for me in terms of whether criticism is anti-Semitic or not is that, can we keep the focus on that aspect? Like, this whole idea that the tail wags the dog or whatever is ridiculous. If the United States wants it to stop, it'll stop. Just like when the Colombian government
I want
essentially
to jump
the same
in
role.
And ask another question.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I just you answered a lot of questions that I would have asked but hadn't yet. So that's fine. Jewish Voices for Peace. Is that the right organization? Am I naming the one that
Yes.
is involved?
For peace.
Jewish Voice for Peace Action specifically is their 501c4 political advocacy organization. Jewish Voice for Peace, the general organization, is a 501c3 and does not make political endorsements.
Was that the organization, or was it one of the organizations that made the call for protests and occupations on campuses?
Yes.
Okay. Now, and that organization also is involved with the Uncommitted Movement, and is it a funder of the Uncommitted Movement?
We're not really actively fundraising at the moment. It's a grassroots effort. Some of the campaign finance law gets a bit hectic because we don't technically have a unifying candidate. So each delegate serves as their own candidate. We don't have a unifying way to raise funds. And so at the moment, it's a matter of
when you started, did you get seed money from Jewish Voices for Peace? Okay,
we didn't get seed money from anybody. The organization that did the lifting, to the extent that there was lifting off the bat, was the statewide DSA chapters, basically North New Jersey, Central Jersey, South Jersey DSA chapters. And then once we got off the ground with that minimal input at the beginning from our members as a membership-driven organization, then we were able subsequently to get endorsements from Jewish Voice for Peace Action, Students for Justice in Palestine, etc.
So my understanding is Jewish Voice for Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, the organization that called for the protests, receives money from the Tides Foundation, which is a dark money Democratic Party organization. DSA is aligned with, but not directly funded by the Democratic Party. But my interpretation of the movement so far is that it represents a split within the Democratic Party, that for the most part, the people involved are Democrats, whether or not they're Democrats just as voters or on a deeper political level as organizers, that this movement is about changing the character of the political character of the Democratic Party primarily, and that there are different factions within the Democratic Party who are interested in that. Would you say that is true?
I'd say that could definitely characterize some aspects of the movement. As with any movement space, it's contested and complicated. It's a lot of coalitional dynamics, but there are certainly elements within the coalition that are approaching it in that way. Like, I know for myself as a DSA member, I'm a member of the Bread and Roses Caucus, which advocates for a dirty break with the Democratic Party. We could go into a lot of details about that. But I know Listen to Michigan specifically was basically kicked off by Layla El Abed, which is Rashida Tlaib's sister. And I know that they've had a lot of influence from that direction. And I think one of the really neat things about this campaign is that it does appeal to people across a lot of these lines, where Jewish Voice for Peace can be interested. Democratic Party operatives may be interested to the extent that they have personal concern about this issue. But then also we've gotten support from, for example, Uncommitted Pennsylvania had extensive support from the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They had support from Socialist Alternative, and these are at least ostensibly Trotskyist organizations, although PSL, I think, would dispute that characterization at this point, despite their organizational history. And we could go all the way down the line, but the cool thing about it is that this particular tactic is a way of achieving material change that people can back from across a broad variety of political perspectives, whether that's Greens, Independents, Democrats, etc. Because it's not necessarily.
I had another question I want to follow up with. I just want to ask one other question here. The other thing that is a follow up with that is because of the aid package to Ukraine and Israel has already passed. Does the Uncommitted? How does the Uncommitted campaign envision having a material effect in the short term, or will it have to occur after the election? And am I hearing it right that you've gotten on the ballot for primaries but not the general? Is that true?
Yes. So that's the tactical choice. Is that we can exert pressure now in the primary cycle prior to the general election, because as I said earlier, 5,000 people per month are being killed. So we've already had a primary in Pennsylvania. This month, there's an uncommitted effort in Maryland, and our primary is on June 4th, which happens to be my birthday, hoping for a big turnout. But
for your birthday or for both days?
Yeah, all of the above. And Joe Biden will be on the ballot in November, obviously. And we are agnostic as to the particular choices folks supporting us are going to take in November. We have had support from third parties. We have had support from diehard Democrats. There are many folks that we had to convince to re-register as Democrats who had already changed their registration because
Dave,
of this
may
issue.
I say something? I want to
go ahead.
talk about, you make fantastic points. I just want to reiterate one more time that this is a spontaneous mobilization of people, from all walks of life. And the main goal is to stop the genocide as soon as possible. I don't want this discussion, which is all of the points you made are excellent, but the tactical or strategic goals that we're constantly debating, right, are not the essence of what we should be focusing on. What we are all focusing on, and what we should unite over, really, regardless of how we approach the whole thing, from the students to faculty to the uncommitted, whatever that may mean to different voters and citizens and participants in that effort. There is something extreme happening right now, as Dave said, and we want to stop it. So out of despair, out of outrage, many of us are trying to engage in any way available to us and imaginable with this dynamic and increasingly so devastatingly offensive to how our government addresses us, all of us really, situation. So everything David said is I couldn't agree more, and you describe it so well. You raised so many fantastic points about the economic incentives, right? The pensions, tuition money, our tax money. As Douglas said as well, the bill for the almost 100 billion, just passed. So we have to imagine and reimagine what we are doing as we are doing it. I think the spontaneity of this movement is very, very important for all of us to highlight and engage with. We did not start with a specific strategic or tactical goal as representing a specific party or a faction within the party. Right? And we happen to be DSA members. Quite frankly, I personally couldn't care less about DSA either. The only reason why I support DSA in New Jersey is because I've met some fantastic people, and I feel like doing something and engaging actively, other than just talking about things, is better than nothing. So my personal involvement with the party, and I think that captures the feelings of many of our supporters, supporters of the campaign or the party in general. My involvement, again, is interpersonal. I want to do something about the things that are infuriating me on a political level, and this is why I became a DSA member, right? But I couldn't care less about what the national strategy is or what they're discussing in that state over there, and what we agree on or disagree on. The magnitude of this historical moment, and I'm a historian. That's what I would like to bring into this discussion. This is a existential crisis for the United States of America, because what's happening in Gaza is not just a regional conflict or something that the Israelis and the Palestinians have to figure out by themselves. Again, as Dave said, it is our client state. Israel has been, right from the outset, a creation of Western colonialism initially, and then when the U.S. took over, it became our main military base in the Middle East. And quite frankly, I personally think that was an expression of anti-Semitism, how we appropriated and abused the very real, justified Jewish trauma, right? And this quest for security that was born out of the horrors of not only World War II, but a long history of anti-Semitism back in Europe. What people don't seem to appreciate is that anti-Semitism is very closely intertwined with Western culture, and specifically European culture in the 19th and 20th centuries. In the Ottoman Empire and Arab lands in general, for a number of historical reasons, Jewish communities, up until the creation, the foundation of Israel, were relatively well respected, and they did not face the same persecution that with World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust reached new levels, right? So the historical process in and of itself has everything to do with Western history or Western culture. And in that context, in the 21st century now, we are faced with some very critical questions as to where all of this has led all of us who identify one way or another with the West, economically speaking, politically speaking, culturally speaking, because it just so happens that we were born in one of these regions that fall under that, umbrella framework, or we chose to become part of that matrix of economics and politics and cultural canons that we describe as the West. So what's happening in Palestine reveals much longer processes, and it becomes an existential question. It was instinctive. It was
existential for the United States?
For the United States, first and foremost, but I would argue for the West as a construct and a matrix of all these different dynamics. Yeah.
How do you account for the fact that the United States doesn't only treat Israel as a client state, but also treats Iran as a client state? I remember there's an old Woody Allen movie called Bananas, where there's a revolution in Latin America, in a fictional Latin American country, and it shows that there's a scene where they show the army being flown in, and one soldier asks the other, "Are we fighting on the side of the rebels or on the side of the government?" And the other guy says, "Well, the CIA is not taking any chances. Some of us are going to fight for the rebels, or some of us are going to fight for the government." So, I mean, it seems to me that as I look at this as a Marxist, as not at all a struggle between East and West, but as disintegration and hopefully not, but probably a reformulation of capitalism, global capitalism. And so it remains to be seen whether or not the relationship that the United States has with Israel will change, and whether or not they're going to, that could change, and a lot of really horrible things could happen. We could decide we're not going to back Israel, but we are going to defend Taiwan. And there could be a global war that breaks out between China and Europe and the United States. There are all sorts of conflicts that are rising, but I don't think to think of them as along ethnic or civilizational lines is necessarily the correct thing. There was before the invasion of Ukraine, there was a lot of tension between Russia and China, and there was and both Russia and China were possibly going to be U.S. client states or be close to the United States. China had most favored nation status for a long time. So I wonder about this. First of all, if we think of it as an existential threat, what if it isn't? What if in 2 years' time things have not massively changed for the United States? Where does that leave this movement? And the second thing I would ask you both is, would you become committed to the Democrats again if this deal that's going on right now ends the conflict? It's very unlikely to, but they're negotiating for the hostages to be released, and one of the possibilities is that the conflict could end. And that seems to be what Anthony Blinken wants, from what I've read. So if that happened, would the uncommitted movement lose its purpose? Those are some difficult questions. I try to be.
Those are, especially the first ones, these are some excellent points, and thank you for raising them. Quite frankly, I don't think we have to decide on one thing happening, right? It can be a little bit of everything. And quite frankly, in history, it is very rare that we can explain everything by reference to only one model, and which has been always my problem with Marxism, which is brilliant, but it is it's part of something much bigger very often. So if we deny any other method of analysis, or if refuse to engage with any other method of analysis, I think we take away from Marxism as well the wrong conclusion. So I agree with what you said, absolutely. At the same time, I wouldn't describe that as a clash between the West and the East. It is presented, though, in terms of rhetoric as precisely that, and we have heard it all in terms of parochial arguments and language used, the forces of darkness, the forces of light, in very genocidal terms. And I want to highlight one more time that this is not a conflict; it is a genocide in every definition of the word, legal, historical, and quite frankly, to decide if something, an unfolding process, could be described as a genocide is something that has to do more with history than just with the law. But regardless, any way you may decide to approach it, it is not just a conflict. And I think nationalism has everything to do. We could have a very long conversation about that. But if I am to try and simplify as much as I can, back to the point of the client state. Obviously, the United States of America is approaching every single country when they can as a client state, and traditionally it was Greece, Turkey, and Iran was the buffer zone against Soviet expansion, right? Other than Israel, after the fall of Iran, after the revolution, things in Iran became a little bit more complicated for American foreign interests, but that superiority complex that we have towards the whole world, with the possible exception of Western Europe, is I think, very well established. So I would agree with that statement. Why is Israel different? Was that your question? That's how I understood it.
No, my question was, what if this isn't an existential crisis for the United States? I mean, first of all, what does it mean to say it is? Because when you say that, what it almost sounds like you're saying is that, I don't know, that the Israeli army will be defeated, and then along with it, the United States
That's
will
not
fall.
what I'm saying at all. I'm sorry. I need to clarify.
Okay, I know.
This is an official crisis for the soul of the United States of America, naive as this may sound. And quite frankly, there are different images and rhetoric and economic incentives that we can use or refer to in order to capture something of the essence. What is the United States of America as a political experiment, right? So much more than a nation state, for sure. But our direct support is a weak, really, term to use in order to describe our connection to Israel. That state exists because we want it to exist. We fully fund everything. We provide the weapons that are currently used to commit the atrocities that we all witness live on our social media, but also their whole defense system is based on our funds, right? Our technology. It is our civilizational mission, really, as a continuation of British colonialism that Israel represents in that context. And this is why I truly believe that on some level, this is an expression of deeply rooted anti-Semitism, how we have weaponized Jewish trauma. And this is, again, why Dave's previous point about Jewish voice of peace, for peace, and how instrumental Jewish voices in general have been, younger generations in particular, in rebelling against that narrative that this is good for Jewish interests, that we have this absurd situation of a state that has been created to be hated and resented by its neighbors. The conditions were there from the beginning under the false premise of Jewish security and prosperity, which was an understandable quest at the time considering, but the terms of the arrangement suggested right from the outset that that was rather unattainable. So what I'm saying, what I'm trying to capture here when I'm talking about this existential crisis is that whether we like it or not, the US has become a global superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and this is our main identity, right? And we have been on that path for quite some time, ever since the 18th century. If you like, you want to go back to the American revolutions and Negri's definition of empire and all that, a nation, an empire, a different political creature that relied so much on economic tools, military campaigns, but also rhetoric, the rhetoric of revolution, and then the rhetoric of human rights, which was always part of the American experiment, that tension, that contradiction. We have a ruthless empire, we have a ruthless military machine that is structural to who we are as an economy, and at the same time, somehow, we have managed to become the main messenger, or rather, if you like, America has positioned itself as a continuation and simultaneously as the main challenger against European colonialism right from the outset. And after World War II and the defeat of the Nazis, we were those who fought in the name of human rights and came up with new organizations and terms in the context of international law, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the hypocrisy of it all notwithstanding, as a historian, I believe that storytelling is important. And when I talk about the Cold War, for instance, and how we won the Cold War, which is a fact that we did win that thing to a certain extent against the Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union collapsed, right? I mean, whether or not what it was caused by.
I agree with what you're absolutely, yes. I would also suggest that the Cold War continued, but the collapse of the Soviet Union, if there was anything to be said about the success of the United States, wasn't that, Reagan in its brilliance and all that, created the biggest military in the world, which, by the way, did not win any victories. We just spread together with the Soviets, devastation everywhere in the context of proxy wars and all that. If there was anything at all to be said, was in terms of rhetoric. And that rhetoric resonated with the people who lived in the Soviet Union at the time, that there is dissent, right? The possibility of dissent in the West. Look at the civil rights movement. Or the anti-war movement and all that. As somebody who comes from that part of the world, I can, what I'm trying to describe is that America, or the US, always had the dual image, the ruthless imperialist, but also they lead in terms of dissent, of civil rights, right, of clashing with the establishment, which is not something that the Soviet model could offer at the time. So the existential crisis that I'm trying to describe here is that we're not even pretending anymore, right? The illegality, the cruelty, the impossible to justify in any way nature of it all, which is destructive to the Palestinians first and foremost, but also to Judaism, given that we have this false association of Judaism with genocide, and Jews themselves, they're denied. How crazy is that? They're denied the right to decide what their identity means to them if it's not fully identified with the policies of, at this point, paranoid regime that is completely out of control. It's really ridiculous to me that we are denying Jewish people the right to decide what Judaism means. And this whole rhetoric of anti-Semitism is anti-Semitic in and of itself. What other culture or people, let's say in Greece, we had a number of dictatorships, right? And the Greek state has been, again, created as a theocracy right from the outset. We still don't have a separation between state and church in Greece. But if anybody told the Greeks, such as myself, that that's all you are, that's your identity, either you identify fully with that ethno-religious aspect of your history and the dictatorships, right, that used it and abused it, you're not Greek. It would be ridiculous and offensive. But we are doing that to every Jew in America or across the world. We have taken away from them in the name of self-determination, true self-determination, which is extremely problematic. And back to the existential crisis. I'm not talking about a clash between the West and the East. I'm talking about a relative balance of power. I do hope that at some point we're going to live in a world that's going to be more socialist, more inclusive, culturally and economically speaking, but we are not there right now. And in this context, in this phase of globalization, the US has played a role that was dual, again, as a force of destruction, but also in very critical moments, America always found the US is what I mean by America. I shouldn't say America in general. The US has.
That's all right.
As a
we define America as the US defines America.
Experiment again. Enough dissent, right? Or we have managed to accommodate, and I'm speaking as an American again, we have managed to accommodate historically enough dissent to reclaim a position of power. This is what true power is. So even from that point of view, this is a very self-destructive situation. We are losing legitimacy across the world, even as a pretense. I mean, we're not naive. We know how international law operates and what it means. But right now, what the United States of America means is unprecedented in how it is approached. And I want to share something really interesting with all of with both.
I do want to ask another question, actually,
if I may say so, because that's important. As an immigrant who has like thousands of contacts across the world, especially in Europe and in the Near East, in the Middle East, as all of this was unfolding, it was just my networks were just, American imperialism, they're criminals, they're killers, blah, 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 understandably so. And all of a sudden, after the student movement started and the encampments and all that, you see this, like, again, romanticization that may be naive or just like an empty ideology, right? Romanticization of what the American experiment is. And the whole world is, again, looking at the US as precisely the country that is simultaneously the ruthless imperialist, but also the country of dissent. And there is something to be said about that.
Okay, so here's, let me just tell you what's informing the kinds of questions I'm asking, and then I might have the ability to ask one last question. I've been involved in the left since '91. I'm 53 years old. I've been doing a podcast now for 15 years. I just celebrated the 15-year anniversary of this podcast. When I started, Obama was president, but I had been involved pretty actively on the left since 2001, since the September 11th attacks. I was involved in the peace movement then. And what I'm worried about right now is that we're going to repeat the same kinds of moves that did not work very well in 2003. There was a sense of urgency in 2003. I felt it myself at the time. Originally, I was opposing the invasion of Afghanistan, which was suffering from a massive famine before the bombs started to fall. And I prioritized that as the message that we should be trying to get out to people on the left first, and then overall to society. But because of there was a sense of urgency at the time, we did not try to think through the history that had gotten us there, and or the what kinds of things were needed politically in order to really overcome the conditions that had created the war on terror. And so rather than do that, we had a peace movement that once Iraq was invaded, pretty much disassembled itself into the Democratic Party. And there was a lot of hope in Obama in 2008, who did not run as a peace candidate by anyone's standards within the peace movement, but nonetheless rhetorically posed as a peace candidate, but did not, follow through on his actual promises in office. And I just look at the way in which the Democratic Party has been dominating the left throughout my life, and how every move, even moves to break from the Democratic Party, circle back to the Democratic Party as the ultimate political force that might be able to change things. And I worry, and I know that a lot of the kids out there protesting now feel the urgency of this, about this crime, and don't have the memory of a cynical old man to know, oh yeah, well, this happens again and again, and feel that they are responsible for changing things, and who, by not being given the opportunity to think politically, but being given slogans and being forced to react spontaneously instead, may very well end up in 4 years, say, either completely apolitical or just within some faction of the Democratic Party. And so that's my concern right now. When I say that on Twitter, I get a lot of far leftist people, Marxists, calling me all sorts of names like Zionist and so forth, but that is not what I'm motivated by at all. I'm motivated by trying to actually build a politics that could start to address things a little more deeply. So my question would be, again, a repetition, which is, there's a deal on the table right now. Your strategy is to put pressure on Biden during the primaries. If he gets that deal, will that hurt your chances to put pressure on him? And given that there really aren't any other candidates that he's facing in the primaries, how much of an effect could this really have on Biden after the passage of this aid package? So that's my question.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. So for Vote Uncommitted New Jersey, I can't necessarily speak beyond New Jersey because I'm not in those calls, but our core principles are demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, demanding an immediate and unrestricted entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. We stand for the liberation of Palestine. We demand the immediate cessation of all arms shipments, military and economic aid from the United States to Israel. And so that is a struggle that's probably going to go beyond this primary season. This primary season is a tactical choice that we're making. And you asked earlier, like, what material impact do we expect to have through this means, especially given the fact that this aid package just passed and that they're ostensibly negotiating peace, although they've, as they're fond of bringing up in a disparaging manner, there's ostensibly been peace negotiations going on in the Middle East for more than my entire lifetime. So whether or not those will pan out in the near future, we can hope that they will. We can hope and support efforts in that direction. But I think all of these things are contested not only outside of institutions, but within the institutions. Julius Nyerere said, the United States too is a one-party state, but it has two of them. So like, it's contested within the party. It's contested outside the party. Whether or not it ends up in the Democratic Party, the idea is to force the Democratic Party by means of political power to make some sort of change. And the specific changes that we are the demands that I just outlined. So if we can get enough support to get policy change in that direction. So it's key. Like, we had debates about this going in, especially having put a slogan on the ballot about, all right, so what do we want the slogan to be? We indicated that it had to be a permanent ceasefire, because that literally the day that we filed our petitions, all of a sudden the state Democratic Party of New Jersey began calling for a ceasefire. That was around the same time that Kamala Harris made her little speech at the Edmund Pettus Bridge with the wonderful social media pause where she says, "We need a ceasefire," pause for applause, for 6 weeks. And it's like, okay, 6 weeks isn't going to do it, hon. Like, that's not, we need a permanent ceasefire. And we also included justice for Palestine, because even if we have a ceasefire, there's famine ongoing. People need all sorts of aid, humanitarian and otherwise. And there's probably going to be reparation needed for this massive crime against humanity that's been undertaken in our name. I'm a big fan of the "if not now" folks that are Jews saying "not in our name." Like, this is not what we want, and we are trying to shake our fist in the face of these people and say, please stop doing this. And I get your concern that this has been done before. We've shook our fist about a lot of things. I'm not the same age as you, but I am a bit older than college students. I'm 34. I was a right winger when you were protesting against the Iraq war. I was raised as an evangelical Christian. I am still a Christian, I think. But my moral motivations coming out of that are very different than they were during the George W. Bush administration, because I've learned a lot of things thanks to the internet, thanks to folks like Elektra doing the education for these kids. And I think that Elektra alluded to earlier, this is a generational shift. And I really think that what we can do is implore this, actually not even implore. I think that the material base is shifting. The opinions of the American populace on this issue are shifting in a way that it has not shifted before. Anti-war sentiment has been existing before, but on this particular issue, Mark Lamont Hill has the book about progressive except for Palestine. This has always been sort of the untouchable. And I think that's what Elektra was alluding to when she said that it's an existential crisis. Like, I don't know that means that by that she said, like, the United States is not going to cease to exist, but it may cease to exist in this way. And my hope, honestly, as a socialist, is that in the downfall of the British Empire, the British got healthcare out of it. They got education out of it. Like, if the United States is going to take a step back from actively promoting client states across the world that are committing genocide against their own people, then I would hope that would be able to open the possibility of reallocating that funding into our communities to make a difference in the education of these kids, to make a difference in healthcare. Because, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a Teamster. I've been a Teamster because I wanted Bernie to get us free healthcare. He didn't get us free healthcare. So I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to work 12 hours overnight in a warehouse every night to make sure that my son doesn't have this problem. And that's where the allocation of resources needs to be, as they chant at the protests, money for jobs and education, not for wars and occupation. And I think, coming from a church background, there's a certain catechism to that. And I get that sometimes slogans can be alienating for people, but I think that you can learn a lot by showing up and being there. And I think that these students, there is a spontaneity element that can be questionable in terms of it ending up getting captured. Olufemi Taiwo has a great book about the elite capture of identity politics, for example. But like, being there in the space at these encampments, being at marches for Palestine, being at I was with Red Letter Christians, which is a more progressive organization that did a die-in at a Lockheed Martin facility, blocking the trucks entering and exiting on Good Friday. And like, that's an expression, like I said, all of these fronts are contested. It's contested within Christianity. It's contested within Judaism. It's contested within Islam. It's contested within Marxism. Like, we need to push to whatever extent that we can, in whatever capacity that we have, to move this issue. Because, as we said, there are 5,000 people dying every month as long as this keeps going on. And that's at a minimum, leaving aside the famine.
And
so
if I were to say something,
June 4th.
The deal they're negotiating, which is very unlikely they will get at this point, and it is very clear to all of us who know something about the region that this whole farce with Iran, right, was just to get permission to invade Rafah, potentially, because Netanyahu is just doesn't have any other choices at this point. So I don't see how that deal can work. But even if it did, I there, it's like for 40 days, and then what? The carnage will start again. This is ridiculous. And again, I keep using the exact same term, offensive to all of us. What are we negotiating exactly? And Blinken, he's going to different states in the Middle East. Our own client states are turning their back to us. This is how bad in terms of incompetence this is. Blinken is just a joke right now in these visits. Say what you want about the US, but as a superpower, right, who pays everybody's bills and whose army is causing so much distraction. The fact that our representatives are so incompetent and so out of it, completely incapable of like even navigating or managing. Forget about like justice and everything else we were talking about, but even on a very basic diplomatic level, these depths of incompetence are unprecedented. And I would defend our students, the slogans. And let me share that with you, Douglas. I've already identified myself as one of the oldest people, perhaps, in that whole situation. I naturally, right, I would tend to agree with you. Personality-wise, I am not somebody who is comfortable with slogans at all, or any types of spontaneous activism. And we can like psychoanalyze my own trauma. It's completely irrelevant. But that's not what I see happening right now, because it has to do with a historical moment. And I would like to paraphrase, it's a cliche, but Hannah Arendt's banality of evil. I would like to paraphrase that and use it to describe what we're witnessing right now, which is a banality of empathy. Right? It's a banality of empathy that is inarticulate at times, or very well established on historical analysis on the end of us who actually specialize in these things. We can talk about the history of it all. We can talk about international law. We can talk about international relations. But even with no knowledge of what's happening, it is the 21st century. It is the fourth industrial revolution. Social media or podcasts such as yours, I think you are part of that revolution that we all instinctively try to participate in, right? It is a shift. And it wasn't deliberate, perhaps, and that's a good thing as far as I am concerned. It is not a top-down decision for us to march towards a new future, a new political engagement with the US and the world, but it is happening nonetheless. In the same way the first industrial revolution changed the world, the fourth industrial revolution is changing the world yet again. And this is why we see this, as Dave was saying before, I am so impressed by what these college kids have accomplished, right? With like the different chats and zero money. Forget about funding. You don't need it. It's if you know how to go about the internet and social media, it's extremely powerful, the same way the industrial revolution, the printing press and all that. Now it's podcasts, right? Such as the conversation we are now having and for which we're grateful. It is how these young people are mobilizing, but also debating things in a way that is, it would be unfair to describe as just slogans. And if I may say something relevant, I was listening to your very interesting discussion with Chris Coutron, and I really liked your questions. I did not like his approach at all. And I'm not going to criticize him from the perspective of slogans. I love an opportunity to have a longer discussion with him. But the cynicism of truly an expired system of analysis is a little problematic in lack of other descriptive terms. There is nothing wrong with young people becoming emotional when confronted with thousands of civilians, mostly women and children, getting slaughtered right in front of their eyes. And the fact that we have that like direct connection, thanks to social media and all that, makes that possible in a way that wasn't possible before, right? And there is nothing wrong against having a reaction. There's nothing wrong with having a reaction against all of it. As to the analysis of it all, again, respectfully, we hear a number of experts, some of whom, or non-experts, some of whom mean well. And I do understand, that's what I was trying to share before, how some people by instinct do not like that collective mentality that resembles a mob at times, right? And can become a trap. And all of our great ideals and slogans can result to nothing or even backfire against all of us. At the same time, there are real historical reasons as to why Palestine is different, why it hits a nerve for so many of us. And it's clearly not, it's part of a whole system. It's not, it's the peak of the iceberg or the top of the iceberg. I mean, we can talk about Saudi Arabia, we can talk about Iran, we can talk about the other atrocious totalitarian regimes in that part of the world, and how the Cold War and American foreign diplomacy in particular has shaped so many of these dynamics. We can talk about Sudan. We can talk about Taiwan, as you said. So Palestine is not an exception, and it is not an anomaly. It is the most overt manifestation of something that is wrong with this whole house of cards that is now collapsing. And the existential crisis is not that the house of cards is collapsing. That's a good thing. The existential crisis is, what are we going to make out of it, which agrees with your own concerns, I think, right? We are worried. This is why we're trying to participate as actively as we can. And we do not have the perfect solution or even a strategy yet. If Biden delivered, he's not. There's no way he's going to deliver. But even if he did, and I'm not talking about this deal, because this deal is yet another disgrace, but if somehow they established ceasefire and a true peace process, right, negotiation for a free Palestine, we could have a conversation about what the Democratic Party means, but these are rhetorical questions. None of this is going to happen, quite frankly, as so much is clear. So what are we asking for? We're asking for alternatives that are yet to be created, as far as I am concerned. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, that we don't have options right now. So Trump may get reelected, and this is going to be a disaster. There's no doubt about that. But this is an expired political system. We need to actively participate in shaping something else. And this is not going to happen in one day or in 1 month. And this campaign is 1 month old, or 1.5 months old, Dave, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going to find all of these solutions, but we feel, and that's what I was trying to capture with the banality of empathy, right? At times it is very dangerous, especially for those of us who have an intellectual and academic identity and enjoy these conversations and analyze things from a perspective of complexity and nuance. And I particularly enjoy that myself as well. But it is very dangerous to at times overlook completely that when by the billions, the peoples of this world are marching in the name of Palestine, that means something. And I could explain what I think it means from the perspective of history, but even without a PhD in history or any type of expertise, the fact that billions are marching for something in and of itself is a
Billions of people
across the world, really? Yeah, absolutely.
I just didn't know it was billions.
Marching, metaphorically speaking, look at the overwhelming majority of the peoples of this world are, it's a global slogan. They're marching by the millions. They are on the side of Palestine by the billions. These are the real numbers, right?
Oh,
if
sure.
you look at numbers in every region, with the exception of the West. So we are all alone in the US with, and I think the UN conversations and votes are a very good manifestation of that dynamic. We have reached a point when like the US is all alone, we're voting against the whole world to block everything, to block a ceasefire, to block any type of negotiation. We have Blinken and Biden now saying that the ICC and the ICJ have no jurisdiction. Mind you, this is the administration that was elected to make up for the Trump disaster that resulted in this isolation of, the U.S. Vis-a-vis the international community. And now we have the exact same people who were restoring the American power and American, normalcy. Normalcy is the term they love to use, saying that the International Court of Justice and the International Court of Criminal Court have no jurisdiction to decide that Netanyahu is a war criminal, which is what they're currently investigating. Really, if they don't have jurisdiction to do precisely that, who has it, and what's the point of having an International Court of Justice, even as a symbolic statement?
I'm kind of on Mearsheimer's side about this stuff, which is I'm not normally a conservative in this way, but it seems to me that courts of law are only operational within nations at this moment and not internationally. And it's a power game there, but maybe I'm wrong. I wanted to say one closing thing from my point of view.
I'm sorry, you made a very important point, and I want to address it. I fully agree with you again from the perspective of analysis, but you cannot have the exact same people weaponizing the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court against Russia and Putin and everybody else when it suits us, and talk about international law, which we have created as a tool of our expansion, quite frankly. And, a few months later to say that the exact same institution has zero jurisdiction. This is ridiculous, right? At least let's try to pretend properly.
I want to throw a couple of things out here, and then I'll give you guys last say. But so a couple of points. One is that while it's true that the United States and Israel have a very close relationship, China also has a good relationship with Israel, and it's funding its tech sector, and could conceivably pick up some of the slack in a world where the Israeli-U.S. relationship was broken. Netanyahu himself has called for an end to the reliance on U.S. aid for their military power. The right-wing publication Tablet frequently rails against how constrained they are by U.S. money and how they're tired of being a client state of the United States. What I think, and this is very broad, and I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy. I'm a fiction writer. I've written some essays for publication. I run a podcast, but this is what I think, which is that in 2008, there was an economic crisis that started a process of reshaping the world. It didn't take hold overnight. It had to be taken up politically, and it's still being taken up politically, but it meant that there was the end of the neoliberal global capitalist order was underway. What I recently did was I interviewed a guy named Sohrab Ahmari, who's Iranian, but he's American, and he's with, I hope I didn't offend him. And he's pro-labor, but for the Republican Party, right? And what he said was, he sees his vision of helping U.S. labor, strengthening the infrastructure and the welfare state in the United States, along with closing the border and taking apart the neoliberal order, as being pretty much an emerging centrist position that both Biden and Trump shared. Okay, so a lot of the things that we want to see happen on the left that we call for end up happening in ways that are not to our liking. Like, for instance, we wanted a minimum wage of like $15 an hour. We got it through the pandemic, and it wasn't like nationally. It wasn't put in place.
No, of course.
Right. It was put in place by a major disruption to the labor market, which was, cruel to people, difficult to get through, did not strengthen everyday people's power at all, but it did bring up the wage. I feel like when we are thinking through what's happening sometimes these stances that we take trying to figure out who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed are blind us to forces that are happening underneath the surface that aren't so obvious. And while I want to see a ceasefire, right, I don't see the left as it is right now in the United States as having the power to truly accomplish that. So I worry about the way the left is telling itself that, oh, we're going to really make it. This is going to change the world. This is a major moment. I remember during the 2020 when the protests were outside of the White House, I had people from around the world messaging me saying, "There's a revolution happening in the United States," and I was like, "No, no, there isn't. That's not what's happening." So anyway, so those are my concerns. I do think that it's good that people are out there protesting because we have to hold on to our rights to do that. But I'm pessimistic. Maybe I'm cynical. Do I sound cynical to you? What do you think?
A little bit, and I deeply empathize. As I said, no, I do. I really do. I fully understand where you're coming from, and I respect that, and I empathize with that. I can see the sincerity of your arguments. I truly do. I disagree intellectually, honestly. And again, as far as my engagement with all that is concerned, it is not an emotional one. I talked a lot about emotions, and I tried to situate that moment right in the historical context and all that. But my approach to all this is, as a historian, I'm taking the long-term approach, right? We can be cynical about human nature, and that's another conversation you and I can have, but things do change, right? Change is part of history. And one of the things that we observe historically, if there is something unique to be said about the 19th and 20th centuries, and even more so the 21st century, is that the pace of change is becoming... Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Hi.
He was wondering if you got offended or not.
Oh, no, I'm not offended at all. I just have to go to work. So I work overnights at a warehouse in Philadelphia, so I have to be there at 6:30.
Okay. Do you have, since you're in your car, do you have anything that you wanted to add? And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elektra, but
no, of course.
Do you have anything you wanted to add? So I got you here.
I did have one thought as to a particular lever that will still work now that the bill has passed and what have you. Assuming that even if this deal goes through, we will still want Joe Biden to end especially military, but the aid to Israel generally. As you said, that may or may not completely stop what Israel's doing in Japan temporarily, and will at least get us out of the situation of complicity. As for a particular lever that would do that, we could actually enforce the Leahy Law, for example, for once in the history of this country, and or any other legislative efforts to that end. But the main thing is as a means of trying to get them to exert that pressure is just to vote uncommitted on June 4th here, and however many other states are able to do so. But yeah, free Palestine.
I'll write it in. I'll be glad to write in uncommitted. It saves me from having to pick between Trump, Biden, or RFK Jr. I'll write in uncommitted in November.
In November, maybe that should be our new mission, right? As after this. But that's a great point. But back to that question of whether we're cynical or not, I just wanted to conclude perhaps with that change always happens, right? And we're not naive enough perhaps to think that we're moving towards a better world in a linear fashion, but we're moving towards something different. everything changes constantly. And if there is something unique about the 21st century, this is what I was saying, is that the accelerating character of change, the accelerating pace of it all is unprecedented. So changes, political, economic, socioeconomic, cultural, have been occurring throughout human history. This is what history is, and this is the only rule of nature or biology, science, and humanity that never changes, that everything is constantly moving and changing. And the 21st century is faster than ever before. So much of our confusion is because the future has arrived due to technology faster than anticipated, and we are still programmed along the lines of the past, right? So some of our anxiety and frustration, perhaps, and cynicism, which I deeply empathize with, is because of that mismatch of like the unique character of the 21st century and our very human reaction, given that we are all a product of our experiences, as you were very well saying. That's the only world we'll ever know, and this is how we're trying to reach certain conclusions. But things are changing way faster than ever before. This is a revolution, not in the sense of, we're taking over universities and all that. It is a revolution mainly because of the nature of the 21st century, globalization, communications, and Douglas, you and I, as older people and all that, we are becoming part of that revolution even by having that discussion, right? So I think it's plausible to be hopeful on
I'm getting a walker delivered from Amazon, and my AARP subscription is due today too, so I should go. But listen, thank you both for coming on the stream. I'll be glad to have you back on in a little while, maybe a couple weeks, see how things are going with the protest movement. And I think it was a fruitful conversation. And again, just thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. We're truly grateful for the opportunity. And again, you are part of the revolution. No, truly, right. It's so much of it. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.